It all started on a Tuesday, through our credit card statement. There was a charge from a hotel downtown midday on a Thursday 2 weeks prior. Thursday was when Sarah said she'd been at her sister's helping with the kids. I didn't react immediately. Part of me wanted to believe there was an explanation, but another part, the part that had noticed her distant smiles and the way she'd started keeping her phone face down, already knew. I sat with the statement for 3 days, feeling the weight of it press against my chest every time I looked at her across the dinner table. When I finally allowed myself to investigate, it took less than an hour. Her laptop left open while she showered, an email thread with someone named Marcus from her gym. The messages were careful at first, almost professional, but they devolved into something unmistakable. Plans, confirmations, words that made my stomach turn. I didn't confront her that night, or even that week. Instead, I called my attorney, the one who'd handled my business partnership dissolution 2 years earlier. I laid out everything clinically, methodically. He told me what I needed to do: document everything, secure my assets, understand my position before any confrontation. I followed his advice to the letter. Over the next 3 weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I photographed records, backed up files, tracked our finances. I met with a financial advisor to understand how to protect what I'd built. I consulted with a therapist, not because I wanted to save the marriage, but because I needed to process what was happening without letting it destroy me. The rage was there, certainly, but I channeled it into preparation rather than destruction. The therapist, Dr. Stevenson, helped me understand something crucial. My response to this betrayal would define who I was, more than the betrayal itself ever could. She didn't tell me to forgive or to reconcile. She simply helped me see that I had a choice in how I moved forward. I could let this consume me, turn me bitter and vindictive, or I could handle it with the dignity that Sarah had failed to show our marriage. During those weeks, I maintained the facade at home. I came home at my usual time, asked about her day, smiled when appropriate. It was excruciating, but necessary. Sarah seemed relieved by my apparent obliviousness, which only confirmed what I already knew. She wasn't planning to tell me. She was content to let me live in ignorance while she continued whatever this thing was with Marcus. I learned more about him than I wanted to know. Marcus Stevenson, no relation to my therapist, ironically, was a personal trainer at the upscale gym Sarah had joined 6 months earlier. 32 years old, never married, the kind of man who posted shirtless photos on social media with inspirational quotes about discipline and self-improvement. The irony of that last part wasn't lost on me. My attorney filed the papers on Monday morning, and by Friday I had them served to Sarah at her office, a calculated decision. Not out of cruelty, but because I knew she'd be surrounded by colleagues who would help her stay composed, and I needed her to understand immediately that this was final, and I was serious. I didn't want tears at home. I didn't want pleas or explanations or the messy emotional scene that would inevitably come if I'd done this face to face. I spent that Friday afternoon moving my belongings out of our house, the house we bought together 5 years ago, the house where we talked about raising children, the house that now felt like a monument to naivety. I'd already secured a short-term rental across town, a furnished apartment that was temporary but comfortable. I didn't take everything, just what I needed immediately. My lawyer had advised me on what was legally mine versus what we'd need to divide. Sarah called me 17 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. She sent texts that evolved from confusion to anger to desperation. I read each one but responded to none. My lawyer had been clear. Every communication should go through him now. It was cleaner that way, less room for emotional manipulation or misunderstanding. That evening, I sat in my new apartment with a glass of whiskey I didn't really want, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back for weeks. The grief wasn't just about losing Sarah or our marriage. It was about losing the future I'd imagined, the trust I'd given freely, the version of myself who had believed that love and commitment were enough. But even in that grief, I felt something else: relief. The pretending was over. The uncertainty was gone. I knew exactly where I stood now, and there was a strange comfort in that clarity. The divorce proceedings began in earnest the following week. My attorney had prepared everything meticulously. We had documentation of the affair, clear records of our separate and joint assets, a fair proposal for division of property. I wasn't trying to destroy Sarah financially, despite what she might have thought. I simply wanted what was equitably mine and a clean break. Sarah's attorney contacted mine within days, and the counteroffers began. She wanted the house. She wanted half of my business despite having no involvement in it. She wanted spousal support despite earning a respectable salary herself as a marketing director. Her requests were, according to my attorney, standard opening gambits in a divorce negotiation. We rejected most of them and countered with our own terms. What surprised me was how little I cared about the material things. The house, the furniture, even the wedding gifts we'd accumulated, none of it mattered anymore. These were just objects, and I could replace objects. What I couldn't replace was time, and she'd already stolen enough of that from me. But there was one thing I did care about. One move I'd been planning since the beginning. I wanted everyone to know the truth, not out of spite, but because Sarah had been carefully constructing a narrative among our friends and family that painted me as the cold, unfeeling husband who'd abandoned her without explanation. I'd heard through mutual friends that she was telling people we'd simply grown apart, that I'd become distant and unwilling to work on the marriage. So I wrote an email. It was measured, factual, and devoid of unnecessary emotion. I detailed the discovery, the timeline, the evidence, and my decision to end the marriage. I sent it to our close friends, both sets of parents and key family members. I wasn't seeking sympathy or trying to turn people against her. I simply wanted the truth on record before her version became the accepted story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My parents called, horrified and supportive. Her parents called too, apologetic and embarrassed. Friends reached out, many admitting they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't wanted to pry. A few had even heard rumors about Sarah and Marcus, but hadn't known how to tell me, a fact that stung but also validated my decision to be transparent. Sarah was furious. Her attorney sent mine a strongly worded letter about defamation and emotional distress. My attorney responded calmly, pointing out that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and that I'd said nothing that wasn't factually accurate and provable. The letter amounted to nothing but bluster. What I hadn't anticipated was how the revelation would affect Sarah's professional life. Her company had a strict ethics policy, and apparently using company time and resources to facilitate a personal affair violated several clauses in her employment contract. I learned later that she'd been using work trips and flexible hours to meet with Marcus, and that some of the hotel charges had been expensed to the company. A colleague, apparently no friend of Sarah's, had brought this to HR's attention after my email circulated among our social circle. Sarah was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt, but an acknowledgement that consequences were rippling beyond what I'd directly set in motion. But I reminded myself that these were consequences of her choices, not mine. I hadn't reported her to her employer. I hadn't fabricated anything. I'd simply told the truth, and the truth had its own momentum. Marcus, too, faced his own reckoning. It turned out that the gym where he worked had a policy against trainers having romantic relationships with clients, a policy designed to prevent the exact power dynamic issues that had apparently characterized his relationship with Sarah. Someone I never learned who had informed the gym's management. Marcus was terminated within a week. I took no pleasure in any of this. That surprised me, actually. I'd imagined that seeing them face consequences would feel satisfying, like justice being served, but mostly I just felt tired. These were broken people making broken choices, and now everyone was paying for it. Even the satisfaction of vindication felt hollow. The divorce mediation sessions were tense, but professional. Sarah and I sat on opposite sides of a conference table with our attorneys flanking us, working through the division of assets line by line. She looked different now, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her, but I'd learned to recognize that impulse as the people-pleasing tendency that had probably contributed to our problems in the first place. We settled on terms that were ultimately fair. She kept the house, but bought out my equity share. I kept my business entirely. which was appropriate since I'd built it before we married and she'd never been involved. We split our savings and retirement accounts according to the state's equitable distribution laws. No spousal support was awarded, as we'd both been working professionals with similar earning potential. The entire process took 6 months from filing to finalization. In that time, I'd started rebuilding my life in ways I hadn't expected. The therapy sessions continued, helping me understand not just what had happened in my marriage, but patterns in my own behavior that had made me vulnerable to someone like Sarah. I'd been a pleaser, someone who avoided conflict and prioritized harmony over honesty. I'd ignored red flags early in our relationship because acknowledging them would have meant difficult conversations. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected during the marriage, guys from college and former coworkers who Sarah had never particularly liked. I discovered she'd been subtly isolating me from them for years, always finding reasons why we couldn't attend this gathering or that dinner party. Without her influence, I found myself enjoying a social life I'd forgotten I missed. I threw myself into my business with renewed focus. The consulting firm I'd founded had been moderately successful, but I'd been coasting, letting good enough be good enough. Now I pursued new clients aggressively, refined our service offerings, hired 2 new associates. The business grew by 40% in 6 months. Work became more than just a job. It became proof that I could build something that lasted, something that was mine alone. And physical fitness became another outlet. I'd always been in decent shape, but now I trained with purpose. The irony of essentially copying Sarah's gym routine wasn't lost on me, but I went to a different facility across town. I hired a trainer, a 50-year-old former Marine named Bill, who had no interest in anything but making me stronger. The endorphins helped, but more than that, I liked the discipline of it, the way progress could be measured in pounds lifted and miles run. I even started dating again, though cautiously. A friend set me up with her colleague, a divorced accountant named Jennifer who had teenage kids and no illusions about romance. We had coffee, then dinner, then started seeing each other casually. It wasn't love, and neither of us pretended it was, but it was companionship and proof that I could still connect with someone new. Jennifer and I eventually parted ways amicably after a few months, but the experience had been valuable. It reminded me that life continued, that there were good people out there, and that I was capable of trusting again, even if carefully. The day the divorce was finalized, I didn't celebrate or commiserate. I simply acknowledged it as the closing of a chapter. My attorney called with the news that the judge had signed the decree, and I thanked him for his work, paid his final invoice, and went about my day. There was no dramatic moment of liberation or crushing sadness, just acceptance. I ran into Sarah once, about 6 months after everything was finalized. It was at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of random encounter that's inevitable in a mid-sized city. She was with someone, not Marcus, someone new, and she looked happy in that performative way people do when they're trying to prove something. We made eye contact, and for a moment, I thought she might approach me, but she didn't. We simply nodded at each other with the polite acknowledgement of strangers who'd once shared a life. I heard through the grapevine that she'd eventually gotten her job back after the investigation concluded with a reprimand rather than termination. Marcus had moved to another city for a fresh start. Sarah and he had apparently split shortly after the divorce was finalized, their relationship unable to survive outside the excitement of secrecy. I couldn't say I was surprised. My payback, if you could call it that, wasn't in seeing them suffer. It was in refusing to let what happened define me or diminish me. It was in building a life that was fuller and more authentic than what I'd had before. It was in learning to spot my own weaknesses and address them, to demand respect from the people in my life, to walk away from situations that didn't serve me. A year after the discovery, I was in a better place than I'd been in the entire last 2 years of my marriage. I had stronger friendships, a thriving business, better health, and most importantly, a clearer sense of who I was and what I would and wouldn't accept from the people in my life. The betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. It had forced me to examine everything, to shed the parts of myself that had enabled the situation, and to rebuild from a stronger foundation. I learned that maturity in the face of betrayal doesn't mean being passive or accepting mistreatment. It means responding strategically rather than reactively, protecting yourself without unnecessarily destroying others, and using the experience as a catalyst for genuine personal growth rather than an excuse for bitterness. Sarah had taken something from me, but I'd taken something back: my agency, my self-respect, and my future. That, more than any vindictive scheme, was the truest form of payback I could have achieved, and I have no regrets. And as always, thanks for watching. Like, share, and let's know what you think. See you in the next one. Peace.